No ship appeared on the scanners. No hyperspace signature registered. Yet something fell from the void between stars, leaving only questions and the echo of impossible power in its wake. Above the war-scarred plains of Mandalore, the sky tore open. It was not a hyperspace rupture. It was not a cloaking field failure. It was something the sensor techs. Aboard the orbiting shadow, collective cruisers had no name for. A seam of violet light stitched itself across the upper atmosphere, crackling with an energy signature that read as both nothing and everything at once. Then it split, and two bodies fell through, trailing fire. The first hit the ground like a meteor, cratering the rust-colored dirt of a bombed-out settlement outside Sundari's outer districts. When the dust cleared, a man crouched in the impact site, spiky black hair unmoved by the fall, an orange GI scorched at the edges but intact. He rose slowly, blinking at twin suns he'd never seen before, then turned in a slow circle, taking in details with the calm curiosity of someone who had fallen out of stranger places before. Goku. The second impact came harder. Something enormous slammed down 100 meters away, shattering the husk of an abandoned transport. Green-skinned and 7 feet of corded muscle, chest heaving, eyes wild with the disorientation of a mind mid-transformation. The Hulk let out a roar that rattled loose. Viewport glass across the district, not aggression yet, just confusion given voice. Goku's head snapped toward the sound. He didn't recognize the being, but he recognized the feeling radiating off it, barely contained power, teetering on a threshold. He'd felt that kind of pressure before, in old friends and old enemies both. He started walking toward it, unhurried, hands loose at his sides. This was the Clone Wars era, though neither newcomer knew it yet. A galaxy stretched thin between a crumbling republic and a separatist war machine. And on this particular world, neither side mattered anymore. Mandalore had fallen to something worse than either faction. Darth Maul, resurrected and remade, had spent months clawing together the criminal remnants of Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, and the Hutt Cartel into a single fist, and closed that fist around his homeworld. Death Watch enforcers patrolled the streets in Black Beskar. Loyalist Mandalorians who wouldn't kneel had been driven underground or worse. The air itself smelled of promethium smoke and old fear. Goku reached the crater where Hulk stood breathing hard, fists clenched, green skin twitching with barely restrained tension. "Hey," Goku said, raising both hands, palms open, the universal gesture that had talked down berserkers on a dozen worlds. "I don't know where we are, but I don't think we're enemies." Hulk's answering growl was less certain this time. Something in Goku's stance, no fear, no aggression, just steady presence, cut through the rage fog. Banner's mind, buried deep under the green, recognized the pattern. This wasn't a threat postured to fight. It was someone trying to reach him. Before either could say more, the roar of repulsor engines split the smoke-choked sky. 3 Mandalorian gunships, painted in the black and red of Maul's Shadow Collective, banked low over the crater field, and armored figures fast roped down with blaster rifles already raised. "Contact. Unidentified combatants. Sector 7. One shouted through a helmet vocoder. "Shadow Collective HQ wants anything with power readings like that brought in alive." Goku's eyes narrowed slightly, not at the threat, but at the phrase. Power readings. Something out here could already sense them. That was new. That was interesting. He didn't get the chance to think further on it. The lead trooper opened fire, and a bolt of blue energy screamed toward Goku's chest. He caught it, actually caught it, fingers closing around a bolt of scorching plasma that should have vaporized flesh, and flicked it into the dirt like a spent match. The troopers froze for exactly 1/2 second. That was long enough for Hulk. The rage broke loose all at once, not calculated but total, and Hulk closed the distance to the nearest gunship in 2 bounding strides before anyone could retarget. One hand closed around the ship's stabilizer fin. The vessel screamed under the torque as he wrenched it sideways and slammed it into the cratered earth. Troopers scattering, armor cracking against rock. Goku moved almost lazily by comparison, weaving between blaster bolts with an ease that made the encounter look less like a battle and more like a lesson neither side had asked for. A palm strike here, a redirected kick there, nothing lethal, just efficient, overwhelming control. Within 90 seconds, The 3 gunships were wreckage, and the remaining Death Watch enforcers were face down in the dirt, disarmed and disoriented. Goku crouched beside one, tilting his head. Shadow Collective. Darth Maul. Mandalore. He tried the words out like unfamiliar spices. None of that means anything to me yet, but it will. Behind him, Hulk's shoulders were already loosening, the green tide receding, just slightly as Banner's consciousness clawed back toward the surface. Exhausted and disoriented in an alien war zone that smelled of nothing he recognized. Neither of them knew yet what this galaxy would ask of them. Neither knew that somewhere in the black spires of Sindari's occupied palace, a Sith Lord with a cybernetic body and a mind built for war had just felt something ripple across his awareness. Power without the Force, presence without a name, and had already begun to smile. The dust hadn't fully settled over the wreckage of the Shadow Collective gunships when the second wave of locals arrived. And this time, they weren't wearing black and red Beskar. 6 figures dropped from the rocky ridgeline overlooking the crater field, moving with the practiced silence of people who had spent months surviving on a world that no longer belonged to them. Their armor was a patchwork of faded clan colors, dinted and rewelded, nothing matching, everything functional. At their head was a woman in blue and silver, twin blasters already leveled, her stance radiating the specific exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a losing war for longer than she cared to admit. Bo-Katan cries, "Don't move," she called out, voice sharp over the settling smoke. "Hands where I can see them, both of you." Goku raised his hands again, easy and unbothered. The same gesture he'd offered the Death Watch enforcers minutes earlier. Hulk, still shrinking by degrees towards something resembling calm, simply grunted and crossed his massive arms, which, given the size of them, did little to look non-threatening. "We're not with them," Goku said, nodding toward the crumpled gunships. "Whoever they are. We just got here. Like 5 minutes ago. Fell out of the sky, actually." One of the Mandalorians behind Bo-Katan lowered his rifle slightly, studying the wreckage with open disbelief. "Vint, run a scan. I want to know how 2 people leveled 3 collective gunships with their bare hands." Bo-Katan didn't lower her blasters, but her eyes narrowed with calculation rather than reflexive hostility. She'd seen strange things since Maul had returned, cyborg resurrections, Force sorcery, technology from every corner of the galaxy repurposed into cruelty. But this was new. "You're not Jedi," she said slowly. It wasn't a question. "You don't move like them. Don't feel like them, either." She'd spent enough time around Force users, hunted by them and allied with them in equal measure, to know the particular pressure they carried in a room. These 2 didn't have it. They had something else, something louder, cruder, undeniable. "Never heard of a Jedi," Goku admitted. "Where we're from, this," he gestured vaguely between himself and Hulk. "This is just called being strong." Hulk let out a low sound that might have been agreement or might have simply been Hulk running out of patience for standing still. "Hulk hungry," he rumbled, the first coherent words he'd managed since the fall. "And this place is loud." Bo-Katan's second in command, a weathered man named Casca Reeves, stepped closer, studying Hulk's green bulk with something between suspicion and reluctant awe. "That thing put a gunship into the dirt like it was a toy." "He's not a thing," Goku said, a note of firmness entering his easy tone for the first time. "He's my friend. New friend. But friend." Even as he said it, he wasn't entirely sure it was true yet. They'd known each other for all of 10 minutes, but something about the confusion in the green giant's eyes had struck a familiar chord. Goku had spent a lifetime meeting monsters who turned out to be misunderstood, and he trusted that instinct more than he trusted most things. Bo-Katan finally lowered her blasters, though her posture stayed coiled, ready. Desperation had taught her to gamble on strange odds before, and right now, strange odds were the only kind Mandalore had left. "You want to know what this place is?" she said. "Fine, I'll tell you, but you're going to want to sit down for it, because it's not a short story, and it's not a good one." She gave them the shape of it as they walked. Sindari's spires visible in the smoke-hazed distance, occupied and dark. Shadow Collective banners hanging from towers that once flew Mandalorian colors. Darth Maul, a name that meant nothing to Goku and less to Hulk, but which made every Mandalorian around them flinch or grip their weapons tighter. A Sith Lord who had clawed his way back from death, patient and vicious, who had spent years assembling criminal syndicates, Black Sun's assassins, the Pike Syndicate's spice networks, Hutt cartel muscle, into a single weapon, and turned that weapon on his own homeworld. Death Watch, once a faction of extremists, now Maul's enforcers, hunting down every clan that refused to bow. He doesn't want a kingdom, Bo-Katan said, bitterness threading through every word. He wants to prove something. To the Jedi, to the galaxy, to himself, maybe. And he's using our home to do it. Goku listened without interrupting, something settling behind his eyes that hadn't been there during the fight, a shift from curiosity to something more focused. He'd fought tyrants before, men and monsters who mistook cruelty for strength. He didn't know this Maul, but he already didn't like what he was hearing. Hulk, for his part, had gone quiet, arms still crossed, but his eyes, Banner's eyes, flickering back to the surface, between waves of green, tracked the ruined skyline with something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. He knew occupation when he saw it. He knew what it looked like when the strong preyed on the weak, because no one else could stop them. So, Goku said finally, when Bo-Katan's account trailed into a heavy, expectant silence. This Maul guy? You want him gone? I want my home back, Bo-Katan corrected. Gone would be a start. Goku glanced sideways at Hulk, who met his gaze and, for the first time since the fall, gave something that could almost pass for a nod. Okay, Goku said, turning back to Bo-Katan with the easy, dangerous grin of a man who had just found exactly the kind of problem he was built to solve. Tell us where to start. Bo-Katan led them through the tunnels beneath the crater field before the sun fully rose, a network of old mining shafts and forgotten maintenance corridors that had become the Resistance's lifeline since Sundari fell. The air changed as they descended, growing colder, carrying the mineral tang of Mandalore's iron-rich crust mixed with the sharper smell of makeshift medbays and ration packs. Stretched too thin, Goku noticed the way people flinched at footsteps that weren't their own, the way children in the underground camps were hushed, rather than allowed to run and shout. He'd seen war before. He'd never quite gotten used to what it did to the people caught underneath it. This is what's left, Bo-Katan said, gesturing at the sprawl of makeshift shelters carved into the old shaft walls. Hundreds of Mandalorians, some armored, most not, living in the dark because the surface belonged to someone else now. Every clan that wouldn't kneel. Every family that lost someone to Death Watch enforcement squads. This is Mandalore's resistance. All of it. Hulk, ducking to avoid low support beams, took in the sight with a stillness that surprised Goku. Banner's mind was closer to the surface here, quieted by the absence of immediate threat, and something in the sight of displaced families, of children peering out from behind their parents. Legs at the green giant filling the tunnel visibly cost him something. This is what he did, Hulk rumbled. Not a question. This is what he does, Casca corrected grimly. Every week. To someone. They reached a chamber deeper in the network, a war room of sorts. Hollow projectors flickering blue light over a table of scavenged parts, displaying a rough map of Sundari's occupied districts. Bo-Katan pulled up a rotating image, a figure in dark robes, face marked with faded crimson and black tattoos, cybernetic legs gleaming beneath a tattered cloak. Darth Maul, rendered in flickering blue light, looked exactly like what he was, something that had died once and clawed its way back angrier. He doesn't rule from a throne, Bo-Katan explained. He rules from the shadows, the way he always has. Black Sun runs his intelligence network. The Pike Syndicate keeps his forces supplied through spice profits. The remnants of Death Watch, Mandalorians, who chose fear over honor, enforce his will on the ground. Cut off any one piece, and the others adapt. We've tried. Lost good people trying. Goku studied the hologram, arms crossed, expression unusually serious. So he's not just strong. He's smart. Patient. More than you know, Bo-Katan said. He waited years for this. Lost his legs, half his mind. Everything he had. And he still came back and built an empire out of the wreckage. Underestimating him is how you end up dead, or worse, working for him. Hulk's low growl rattled a stack of scavenged datapads on a nearby crate. Then we don't underestimate him. We just take him apart. It's not that simple. Casca cut in sharply. This isn't your world. You don't know how the Force works. How a lightsaber cuts through anything short of pure durasteel. How a Sith mind can turn allies into weapons with a few words. Strength isn't the only thing that matters out here. Goku tilted his head, considering that with genuine interest rather than offense. Force, huh? Like, some kind of energy thing? I felt something back there. During the fight, a kind of pressure in the air, coming off those troopers, faint. Didn't feel like ki, but it wasn't nothing either. Bo-Katan and Casca exchanged a glance. You felt the force, Bo-Katan said slowly, and it's faint to you. Everything's faint compared to some fights I've been in, Goku said, not boasting, just stating fact the way he stated most things. But I get it. New rules. I like learning new rules. His grin returned, sharper this time. The grin of someone who treated impossible odds as an interesting puzzle rather than a wall. Bo-Katan didn't share his optimism, but she recognized something useful in it. Recognized, too, that she had exactly two options left after months of losses. Keep bleeding her people out in a war of attrition she couldn't win, or gamble everything on the two strangers who dropped out of the sky and turned 3 gunships into scrap in under 2 minutes. There's a supply convoy, she said finally, pulling up another section of the map, a winding mountain pass north of Sundari, marked with Shadow Collective transport routes. Pike's Syndicate spice shipment, headed to fund Maul's next enforcement wave. If we hit it, we cripple his supply line and send a message that Mandalore isn't finished yet. And it'll tell you what these two can actually do, Casca added, before we bet the whole resistance on them. Bo-Katan nodded slowly, gaze shifting between Goku's easy readiness and Hulk's coiled, restless bulk, power, without a single wasted motion, beside power that seemed to strain against its own container. Prove yourselves on the convoy, she said. Prove you're not just strong, but that you can be trusted with something bigger. Do that, and we talk about Maul. Goku cracked his knuckles, grin widening. Sounds fair. Hulk, you good with prove yourselves? Hulk's answering smile was mostly teeth, but for the first time, it looked less like rage and more like purpose. Hulk good with smashing spice trucks. Somewhere above them, in a black spire overlooking a conquered city, Darth Maul stood before a bank of monitors relaying grainy footage of the crater fight, watching 2 figures level 3 gunships with nothing but their bodies, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something close to anticipation. The mountain pass north of Sundari was carved by centuries of wind and old mining charges, a narrow ribbon of road flanked by cliffs the color of dried rust. Bo-Katan's scouts had tracked the Pike convoy for 2 days. 6 armored transports, a dozen escort speeder bikes, and a gunship running Overwatch. On paper, it was the kind of target that would have cost the resistance a dozen lives to even attempt. Goku crouched at the ridgeline beside Bo-Katan, watching the convoy's dust trail approach through the pass below, and felt something he hadn't felt since arriving in this galaxy. The familiar hum of anticipation before a fight worth having. Gunship first, Bo-Katan murmured, more to herself than to him, running through a plan she didn't fully trust yet. Take out the Overwatch, then. I got the gunship, Goku said, already rising. That's not the plan. He was gone before she finished the sentence. A streak of orange and blue vanishing off the ridge in a burst of speed that left displaced gravel hanging in the air a full second after he departed. Bo-Katan swore under her breath. The same reflexive frustration she'd felt working with Force users who ignored careful strategy in favor of instinct, except this instinct, she was quickly learning, came with results attached. Goku closed the distance to the gunship in seconds, appearing in the open air beside the cockpit viewport hard enough that the pilot's scream was audible even over the engine roar. He didn't destroy it outright, a flicker of restraint, an old habit of pulling punches against enemies who might still have information worth keeping. Instead, driving a controlled blast of ki into the stabilizer array, sending the gunship spiraling down into a controlled, survivable crash a kilometer off the convoy route. Neat. Efficient. Over almost before Bo-Katan's team had finished repositioning. Below, the convoy had no idea yet that its air support was gone. That changed when Hulk hit the lead transport. He didn't leap from the ridge so much as detonate off it, covering the distance in a single, bounding arc that ended with both fists driving through the transport's reinforced hull like it was scaffolding. The vehicle crumpled, flipped, and skidded sideways across the pass in a shower of sparks, blocking the road behind it. Pike Syndicate guards spilled out of the wreckage and the vehicles behind it, blaster fire lighting up the canyon in chaotic streaks. And Hulk waded into the middle of it with a roar that echoed off the cliff walls. Contact! Contact! We need reinforcements we're not equipped for this, a Pike commander's transmission cut off mid-sentence as Bo-Katan's team opened fire from the ridgeline, picking off exposed guards with practiced precision, using the confusion Goku and Hulk had created rather than trying to match its scale. This was the part Bo-Katan hadn't expected, not the raw destruction, though that was staggering enough, but the space he had created. Every guard focused on the green giant tearing through the convoy center, or the orange blur redirecting blaster fire and disabling speeder bikes with almost contemptuous ease. Was a guard not watching the ridgeline, not watching the flanks, not watching her people slip through the chaos to plant charges on the remaining transports. Cargo holds. Casca's voice crackled over comms, disbelieving. Convoy commanders trying to signal Sundari for immediate extraction. He knows this isn't a normal resistance hit. Let him signal, Bo-Katan said, already moving. Let Maul see exactly what hit his shipment. The fight lasted less than 4 minutes. By the end of it, 5 of 6 transports were disabled or destroyed. The gunship was a smoking ruin in a ravine, and the surviving Pike guards had fled on foot rather than face. The green mountain of muscle still, standing amid the wreckage, chest heaving, knuckles bloodied but healing visibly even as Bo-Katan watched. Hulk turned toward her, and for a moment she braced. She'd seen berserkers before, warriors who couldn't find the line between battle and slaughter once the fighting started. But the green eyes that met hers held something steadier than she expected. Banner, surfacing. Nobody died who didn't shoot first, he said, voice rough but controlled. Counted. It was such a strange, specific thing to say that. Bo-Katan almost laughed, the first genuine impulse toward laughter she'd felt in months. You counted. Somebody should, Hulk said, and there was a whole fractured history in those 3 words that she didn't have time to ask about. Goku landed beside them, dusting off his GI, entirely unbothered by the wreckage around him. That went well, he said cheerfully, then caught the look on Bo-Katan's face and reconsidered. For us, I mean. Sorry about your convoy, he added toward the fleeing Pike guards, though he didn't sound especially sorry. Bo-Katan surveyed the ruin of what had been, until minutes ago, one of Maul's most heavily guarded supply lines, the kind of hit that would have taken her entire resistance force and a dozen casualties to achieve on their own, accomplished by 2 strangers in under 5 minutes. All right, she said slowly, a decision settling into place behind her eyes. You've proven yourselves. She looked toward the smoke rising over the pass, toward the distant spires of occupied Sundari beyond it, and felt the first real flicker of hope she'd allowed herself in months. Now let's talk about Maul. Far above, in Sundari's Black Tower, a comm officer delivered the convoy report with visible dread, and Darth Maul rose from his seat without a word, already recalculating everything he thought he understood about the threat that had fallen into his galaxy. The victory over the convoy bought the resistance 3 days of quiet, 3 days that Bo-Katan spent integrating her newest, strangest assets into a war she'd resigned herself to losing months ago. Goku spent the time restless in the best way, sparring with resistance fighters, who lasted seconds against him but left grinning anyway, asking endless questions about the Force, about lightsabers, about how Ki and this galaxy's strange energy might overlap. Hulk spent it differently, pacing the tunnel networks at odd hours, Banner's voice growing steadier each day, cataloging every family, every child, every name he could learn, as if memorizing the cost of failure might keep him sharp. It couldn't last. Maul made sure of that. The strike came at dawn on the 4th day, not against the tunnels directly, which Maul's forces hadn't yet located, but against a nearby settlement the resistance had been quietly supplying. Farmers and refugees who'd sheltered wounded fighters after the convoy raid. Death Watch enforcers hit it with 3 squads and an interrogator droid, dragging families into the open square demanding names, demanding the location of the green monster and the golden-eyed off-worlder. Bo-Katan scouts caught the transmission too late to stop the raid outright, but in time to send Goku and Hulk racing across the plains toward the smoke. They arrived to a scene that would have been bad on any world. Enforcers herding civilians at gunpoint. A building already burning. A death watch. Commander backhanding an old man who'd refused to answer fast enough. Goku's expression went cold in a way Bo-Katan hadn't seen yet, the easy grin gone, replaced by something focused and dangerous. Hulk's reaction was worse. It wasn't the fight itself that broke the dam. The enforcers went down in seconds, disarmed and scattered by a green blur that moved almost too fast to track. But the moment after, when Hulk found the interrogator droid's restraining bolts still locked around a child's wrist, a makeshift leash used to keep a hostage compliant, something in Banner's mind simply stopped functioning as a brake. He didn't stop at the droid. He didn't stop at the fleeing enforcers. The rage that had been simmering since the fall through the rift, stacked day after day on an alien world full of cruelty he had no context for, no support system to process, broke completely loose. And Hulk turned on the burning building itself, on the wreckage, on anything within reach, roaring loud enough to shatter windows 3 streets away. Hulk! Goku's voice cut through the chaos, sharp in a way it hadn't been yet. Hulk, stop! The building, there's still people in there. Hulk didn't stop. Couldn't. In that moment, Banner's voice buried too, deep under a decade of accumulated fury with nowhere else to go. The galaxy's brutality acting like fuel poured onto an already lit fire. A support beam came down under his fist, and for one heart-stopping second, Bo-Katan watched the wall behind it groan, listing toward the section of the building where 2 civilians were still trapped. Goku moved. He didn't hesitate, didn't calculate. He simply crossed the distance in an instant, caught the falling beam with both hands, and redirected its weight away from the trapped civilians, even as Hulk's next blow landed somewhere, close enough to rattle his teeth. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Goku raised his voice not in excitement, but in something closer to command. Hey, look at me. He planted himself directly in Hulk's path, arms spread, making himself the target instead of the wreckage. I'm not one of them. You know that. Look at me. Hulk's fist came down anyway, not full force. Some fragment of restraint, even in the rage recognizing the difference between Goku and an enemy, but enough that the impact sent Goku skidding back through cracked pavement. Arms crossed defensively, it would have shattered bone in most fighters. Goku absorbed it, planted his feet, and didn't retreat. That's enough, he said, quieter now, and something in his tone, steady, unafraid, utterly without judgment, finally found purchase where shouting hadn't. You're not fighting them anymore. Look around. They're already down. It's just us now. Green eyes, wild and unfocused, slowly tracked the wreckage, the scattered enforcers, the trapped civilians Goku had saved, the building he'd nearly brought down on innocent people trying to save them. The rage didn't vanish so much as it lost its target. And in the sudden absence of a fight, Hulk's massive frame began, slowly, to shrink. By the time Bruce Banner knelt in the rubble, human again, shaking, exhausted, and horrified at how close he'd come, Goku had already pulled the last trapped civilian free and set them gently beside their family. You could have told me you turn into 2 different people, Goku said, crouching beside him, no anger in his voice at all, just concern, and a strange, hard-won patience. I didn't know if it would matter here, Banner admitted, voice hoarse. Didn't know if anything about me would translate. Guess the worst part did. Goku considered that for a long moment, watching smoke curl into a sky that belonged to neither of them. Where I'm from, I fought a lot of people who lost control like that. Some of them never got it back. He offered a hand, pulling Banner to his feet. You did. That's the part that matters. Bo-Katan, watching from a cautious distance, filed away what she'd just witnessed with grim new understanding. The galaxy's greatest weapon against Maul might also be the Resistance's greatest liability. And the only thing standing between the two was a golden-eyed stranger who refused to let either happen. Sundari's Black Tower had once been a seat of Mandalorian governance, clean lines, sweeping views over a domed city built to shelter its people from a poisoned surface. Darth Maul had reshaped it into something else entirely, dim, martial, hung with banners that answered to no flag but his own. He stood now before a bank of monitors, replaying footage from the settlement raid on a loop, watching a golden-eyed stranger catch a falling support, beam with his bare hands, and stop a green-skinned monster with nothing but words. "No force signature," said Rook Cast, one of the few Death Watch officers who'd survived long enough under Maul's command to become something like trusted. "Nothing on any scanner. Whatever they are, they're not Jedi, not Sith, not bounty hunters we have on file." "I know what they are not," Maul said, voice a low rasp that had never fully recovered from the years he'd spent broken and forgotten. "I want to know what they are." He replayed the moment again, the beam, the catch, the physics of it wrong in ways that offended his understanding of the galaxy's rules. He had spent a lifetime cataloging power, the Force in all its forms, technology bent toward violence, the desperate strength of the truly cornered. This was none of those, and yet it was unmistakably strength, raw and total, wielded by beings who moved through combat with an ease that suggested they had never once feared losing. He had felt something ripple across his awareness. The moment they fell into this galaxy, not the Force exactly, but something adjacent to it, loud in a register he didn't have a name for. It had itched at the edge of his senses ever since. An irritant he couldn't quite locate, couldn't quite ignore. "Send scouts," he said finally. "Not Death Watch. Not Pike Muscle. I want eyes on them, nothing more. No engagement." Rook Cast hesitated. "After the convoy, my lord, Black Sun is asking for a stronger response. A show of force. If word spreads that two off-worlders humiliated, word will spread regardless of what I do." Maul cut in, something almost like amusement threading through the words. "Let it spread. Let every syndicate boss and every frightened clan leader wonder what I intend to do about it. Fear is not diminished by patience, Cast. It is sharpened by it." He turned from the monitors, robes trailing across a floor once polished to mirror brightness, now scuffed by years of occupation. He had rebuilt himself from nothing once already, clawed his way back from a junk heap with half a mind and less than half a body, driven by nothing but spite and the memory of what he'd lost. He recognized ambition when he saw it reflected back, even in beings who likely didn't understand they possessed it yet. "They fight for the Mandalorians now," he continued, half to himself. Bo-Katan's resistance. Predictable, desperate people cling to any strength offered them. It will not last. Strength like that, unmoored from purpose, curdles eventually into recklessness. Or it finds purpose that serves someone else entirely. Rook Cast frowned. "You mean to recruit them?" "I mean to understand them," Maul corrected. "Recruitment is simply what understanding sometimes becomes." He allowed himself the ghost of a smile, the expression sitting uneasily on a face marked by faded Sith tattoos and years of hard-won bitterness. "Bring me anything the scouts find. And Cast, tell the Pike Syndicate. Their spice shipment losses will be recovered from Black Sun's cut this quarter. I won't have my own people fracturing over a problem I intend to solve myself." Cast bowed and withdrew, leaving Maul alone with the looping footage and the itch at the edge of his senses that refused to quiet. He thought, not for the first time since his resurrection, of Obi-Wan Kenobi, of the singular fixation that had defined so much of his existence, the hatred that had kept him alive through unthinkable ruin. That fixation had cost him as much as it had sustained him. He was older now, or at least more patient, and patience had taught him that the galaxy occasionally offered tools, sharper than revenge, two beings who could level gunships barehanded, and level entire convoys in minutes were not enemies to provoke carelessly. They were, perhaps, the first genuinely useful discovery he'd made since seizing Mandalore, a weapon with no allegiance yet, no understanding of the galaxy's politics, no reason to distrust him beyond whatever Bo-Katan's resistance had already poisoned them with. Every weapon has a price, he thought, watching Goku's blurred image freeze mid-motion on the monitor, faster than the sensors could properly capture. "I simply have not yet discovered theirs." He would find it. He had built an empire from nothing but patience and a body rebuilt limb by limb. Two strangers from beyond the stars, however strange their strength, were a problem no different in kind from any other he had already solved. "Cast," he called, before the officer had fully left the chamber. One more thing. When your scouts locate them, I want to know how the Green One responds to fear. Not battle. Fear. The kind that isn't solved by hitting something. He had seen enough footage of that unraveling in the settlement too. Recognize a fracture line when it appeared. Every weapon, however powerful, had one. Behind him, the monitors continued their silent loop. Goku's hand closing around a falling beam. The golden-eyed strangers. Voice cutting through. Chaos with words instead of violence. And Maul filed the image away with the same patient calculation. He gave everything else in a galaxy he intended, eventually, to fully own. Stutter in his key flow, like static across a calm line. Gone as fast as it came, but unmistakable. Huh, he said, flexing the arm, more curious than alarmed. That's new. It was enough of a distraction, though, enough that a second volley caught Hulk from 3 angles simultaneously. Another modified, round embedding in his shoulder, with a spark of violet energy that made him roar, less in pain than in raw disorientation. The sensation utterly unfamiliar to a body that had never once felt something interfere with its rage rather than simply fail to stop it. That was when Maul's true trap revealed itself. A squad of Death Watch enforcers wearing modified jetpacks surged in low, not to fight Hulk directly but to herd him, concussive charges detonating in careful sequence, driving him away from Goku's position and toward a reinforced containment corridor built into the district's loading docks. Goku turned to follow and found his path blocked by a wall of black Sun assassins backed by a squad specifically drilled, he'd learn later, on nothing but disruption and delay tactics. They're not trying to kill us, Goku realized aloud, parrying a blaster bolt with the back of his hand, eyes narrowing as the tactical shape of the ambush became clear. They're trying to split us. He was right. And by the time he cut through the assassin line and reached the loading docks, the containment corridor's blast doors had already sealed. Hulk's furious pounding audible even through reinforced durasteel. The violet sparked disruptor rounds in his shoulder doing something none of Maul's ordinary weapons ever could, keeping the rage from translating fully into the strength needed to simply tear the doors apart. Hulk. Goku slammed both palms against the door, he flaring around his fists as he began tearing at the seams. Hold on. Inside the corridor, alone for the first time since the fall through the rift, cut off from the one voice that had learned to reach him. Bruce Banner felt the rage claw upward with nothing and no one to check it, and understood, with dawning horror, exactly what Maul had built this trap to discover. The containment corridor was built for exactly this, reinforced durasteel walls 3 meters thick, energy dampeners lining every surface. A space designed by someone who had studied the footage from the settlement raid frame by frame and asked a single question. What happens when the Green One is alone and afraid, with nothing left to save? Bruce Banner staggered against the far wall as the blast doors sealed. The violet sparked disruptor rounds in his shoulders sending jagged static through senses that had never had to process interference before. The rage was already rising. It always rose. That was the one constant across every version of this nightmare he'd lived through. But this time it rose wrong, stuttering and uneven, like a wave breaking against a shore that kept shifting shape beneath it. Contained came a voice through hidden speakers, calm and rasping, unmistakably pleased. Maul's voice, patched in from the tower, watching through hidden sensors. Interesting. The disruption doesn't stop the transformation. It only makes it harder to control. Banner's vision blurred green at the edges, muscles cording, spine lengthening, and through it all a single coherent thought clawed for purchase. He's studying this. He wants to see what happens when I break. Let him out, Banner ground out, voice already roughening. You don't want this. Nobody wants this. On the contrary, Maul's voice replied, almost gentle. I want this very much. I have spent years cataloging every kind of monster the galaxy can produce. Dr. Banner, is that the name? Cast founded in scattered records your friend let slip. I know what fear does to power. I know what desperation does to control. I am simply curious which one breaks you first. The transformation completed with a roar that cracked the reinforced walls, and Hulk turned on the sealed corridor with the singular fury of something that had been baited, not into a fight, but into a cage. watched, studied, weaponized by someone else's patience. Every blow he landed against the Durasteel came back distorted through the disruptor static in his shoulder, strength translating unevenly. Some strikes weaker than they should have been, others wilder, less controlled, feeding a spiral of frustration that had no outlet. Outside, Goku tore at the blast doors with everything he had, he blazing gold around clenched fists, and made agonizingly slow progress against Durasteel, reinforced specifically to withstand exactly this kind of assault. "Come on," he muttered, sweat beading despite the cold. "Come on." Inside, something worse than rage was beginning to surface. Not the mindless destruction Maul seemed to be hoping for, but something quieter and in its own way, more dangerous: despair. Banner's fragmented awareness, still tethered however thinly to the green tide, recognized the shape of the trap for what it was. Not a fight he could win by hitting harder, because there was nothing here to hit, no enemy in reach. Just walls and cameras and a voice that wanted to watch him unravel. "I promised I wouldn't do this again." Banner's thought surfaced, raw and half-formed beneath the rage. "I promised Goku I had it under control." The disruptor static sparked again, and for one terrible moment, Hulk's fist stopped moving entirely, the enormous green frame trembling, caught between the fury demanding release and a fracture of doubt that had never had room to exist. Inside the rage before, it was the doubt, more than the fury, that Maul had truly been hunting for. "There it is," Maul murmured, watching a sensor readout spike and stutter through the observation feed. "Not strength that breaks you. Uncertainty. You do not fear losing control, Dr. Banner. You fear becoming exactly what everyone already believes you to be." It might have worked, might have collapsed Hulk into exactly the kind of directionless, self-destructive spiral Maul had engineered, if Goku hadn't finally torn a gap through the blast door wide enough to slip through. He blazing so bright it lit the corridor gold, his voice cutting through the dampened static before the doubt could fully take root. "Hey." Goku's voice, familiar, unbothered, utterly certain. "I'm not out there anymore. I'm right here. You're not alone in this, and you never were." That's the part he doesn't understand. Hulk's head snapped toward him, green eyes wild but no longer directionless. And for the second time since falling into this galaxy, found something in Goku's presence solid enough to hold on to. "He's watching," Hulk managed, voice a raw, cracked rumble. "Wants me to break. So don't," Goku said simply, planting himself beside him rather than in front of him this time. Not a barrier between Hulk and the world, but a presence standing with him against it. "Let's give him something better to watch instead." Through the hidden sensors, Darth Maul watched the readout stabilize, watched fury settle into something steadier and far more dangerous than uncontrolled rage. Purpose restored, and felt his carefully engineered experiment yield an answer he hadn't quite anticipated. Not a weakness after all, he thought, already recalculating. A dependency, which is, in its own way, so much more useful. The blast doors came apart entirely under combined force, Goku's ki-charged fists and Hulk's restored strength tearing 3 meters of reinforced Durasteel like wet paper, and the two of them emerged into the shipping district to find Bo-Katan's strike team already fighting a desperate retreat against a second wave of Black Sun reinforcements. But it was what stood beyond the chaos that stopped even Goku's momentum for half a second. Darth Maul himself descended from his tower at last, twin lightsaber blades hissing crimson in the dusk, flanked by a full company of Death Watch enforcers. "You wanted to see us," Goku said, settling into a loose stance, the last traces of tension from the containment corridor burning away into something focused and eager. "So here we are." "Here you are," Maul agreed, voice carrying easily over the settling chaos, cybernetic legs whirring softly as he stepped forward, entirely unhurried. Two beings who fell out of the sky wielding power the Force cannot fully explain, and yet you throw yourselves at a resistance already dying by inches. Tell me, do you even understand what you're fighting for, or is it simply easier than deciding for yourselves? We're fighting because people who can't defend themselves are being crushed by someone who can." Hulk rumbled, shoulders still smarting from the disruptor round, but strength fully restored. Fully his own again. "Simple enough for you." Maul's smile was thin, humorless, the expression of someone who had heard 100 versions of that same righteous certainty and watched every one of them eventually curdle. Simple. Yes, that is precisely the problem. With simplicity, it does not survive contact with a galaxy built on compromise. He raised a hand, and his lightsabers ignited fully, twin blades of red light hissing in the smoke-hazed air. Let us see how well it survives contact with me. He moved first, and even Goku, who had measured his speed against gods and tyrants in his own universe, felt genuine surprise at how fast Maul closed the distance. Cybernetic legs compensating for whatever organic speed he'd lost, blades weaving a pattern of crimson that Goku redirected rather than blocked outright. Unwilling yet to test how thoroughly a lightsaber could cut through him, sparks scattered where blade met the edge of a key-hardened forearm. Goku's eyes widened fractionally, recalibrating his estimate of the fight in real time. Hulk came in from the flank a half-second later, and here Maul showed the full measure of what years of patient study had bought him. He didn't meet the charge head-on, but let it pass a hair's width from his shoulder, using Hulk's own momentum to redirect him into a support pillar with a precisely placed strike from the lightsaber's hilt. More mockery than violence. A demonstration of control over raw power he'd clearly anticipated. "You fight like animals," Maul said, already spinning back toward Goku, blades weaving defensive patterns even as he spoke, voice untroubled despite the exertion. Powerful animals, but animals nonetheless, reacting, never calculating. "You talk a lot for someone still standing in a fight," Goku said, and this time when he moved, it wasn't the restrained, exploratory pace of the first exchange. Gold light flared around him, he roaring to a level he'd been deliberately holding back, and the shift in speed caught even Maul's cybernetically enhanced reflexes half a beat too slow. A palm strike that should have ended the fight connected instead with crossed blades, the impact driving Maul back 3 full meters. Cybernetic legs skidding grooves into permacrete. For the first time, something flickered across Maul's tattooed features that wasn't calculation. It looked almost like the ghost of the fear he'd once carried into a duel against Obi-Wan Kenobi and never fully lost. Hulk recovered from the pillar strike with a roar that shook the district. And this time when he closed on Maul, it wasn't blind fury, it was Goku's earlier lesson, finally settling into muscle memory. Patience wedded to power. Strikes aim not to simply hit, but to herd, to corner, to close off every escape route. Maul's speed depended on. Between Goku's overwhelming speed and Hulk's implacable, cornering strength, Maul found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, retreating. "Enough!" Maul snarled, and threw something small and dark toward the ground between them. A concussive charge that erupted into blinding smoke, buying him the half-second he needed to vanish toward a waiting speeder. Cybernetic legs carrying him faster than either combatant expected. He didn't get far. Goku appeared directly in his path before the smoke had fully cleared, close enough that Maul's speeder swerved. Cybernetic legs skidding to a halt inches from a fist that hadn't moved. Hadn't needed to. The mere certainty of impact enough to stop him cold. Behind him, Hulk's shadow fell across the alley's only other exit, blocking retreat as thoroughly as any Durasteel wall. "You built a whole trap to figure out how to break us," Goku said, breathing hard but grinning despite it. Gold light still flickering at the edges of his frame. "Guess you found out the answer's not really." Maul looked between them, the golden-eyed stranger who moved faster than calculation could track, and the green giant, who had turned doubt into purpose instead of collapse, and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who had built his entire second life on patient recalculation, that he had, for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, run out of angles to play. For a long moment, nothing moved and the smoke choked. Ali except the distant sounds of Bo-Katan's strike team, finally turning the tide against the scattered black sun reinforcements. Maul stood between two beings who had, in the span of a single fight, dismantled every advantage he'd spent years cultivating: speed that couldn't outrun Goku, cunning that couldn't outmaneuver Hulk's newly steadied resolve, cybernetics that couldn't compensate. For power the galaxy had no framework to counter. "You could still walk away from this," Goku said, and there was no mockery in it, only the honest assessment of someone who preferred a fight to end without more bloodshed than necessary. Nobody else has to get hurt tonight. Maul's laugh was low, cracked, genuinely amused despite everything. Walk away. To where? I have spent my entire existence being underestimated and discarded by beings who thought themselves my betters. I built this, he gestured at the district, at the war-torn skyline beyond it, from nothing but spite and patience. I do not simply walk away from it, because two strangers proved stronger in a single encounter. Then we do this the hard way, Hulk said, cutting off Maul's retreat with a single step forward. But it was Goku who moved first this time, not to strike, but to close the last of the distance in a blur too fast for even Maul's cybernetic reflexes to fully track. One hand closing around the hilt wrist of Maul's lightsaber before the blade could fully ignite, the other pressing flat against his chest with just enough force to drive the breath from his lungs and drop him to one knee. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply, finally, overwhelming. You're not getting a third weapon out of this, Goku said quietly, extracting both lightsabers from Maul's grip with an ease that felt almost insulting after everything that had come before. It's over. Hulk closed the remaining distance and, with more restraint than either Bo-Katan or Maul would have credited him with an hour earlier, simply wrapped one massive hand around Maul's remaining weapon arm and lifted him clear off the ground, not to crush, but to hold, immobile and thoroughly. Finally, beaten. By the time Bo-Katan's strike team reached the alley, weapons still smoking from the last of the Black Sun resistance, they found Darth Maul restrained in binders forged from salvaged Beskar, flanked by two beings who looked more exhausted than triumphant. And for the first time in months, Sundari's occupied skyline held the distant sound of Death Watch, enforcers standing down rather than fighting on. The Shadow Collective didn't collapse. Overnight, empires built on fear rarely do, but without Maul's singular will holding its fractured alliances together. Black Sun and the Pike Syndicate turned on each other within days, and Mandalore's scattered clans began the long, uncertain work of reclaiming what had been taken from them. Bo-Katan stood atop Sundari's tower a week later, watching resistance banners raised where Shadow Collective colors had flown, and understood that the war wasn't over, but for the first time, it was theirs to finish. Goku and Hulk stayed only long enough to see Mandalore stable enough to stand without them, trading a hologram from Bo-Katan, equal parts gratitude and warning about the galaxy they'd have to navigate next. For a Rift signature, Republic engineers, working quietly with the resistance, helped calculate back toward the tear that had brought them there. Neither fully understood yet whether it would take them home or somewhere new entirely. You did good, Goku told Banner, as the rift began to hum open above the crater where they'd first fallen. The doubt thing. You beat it. We beat it, Banner corrected, managing something close to a real smile. Didn't do that part alone. Somewhere in a Durasteel cell deep beneath a slowly recovering Sundari, Darth Maul sat in the dark, patient as he had always been, already turning the shape of his defeat over in his mind, not as an ending, but as a single, temporary setback in a life built entirely from surviving worse. The galaxy would remember whether he escaped that cell or rotted in it, that for one brief and violent season, strength without, the Force had humbled a Sith Lord who thought he'd accounted for every kind of power the galaxy could produce. The rift closed behind Goku and Hulk in a final flash of violet light, leaving Mandalore to rebuild under a sky finally, uncertainly, its own again, and leaving behind a story that Bo-Katan's people would tell for generations. Of the day a golden warrior and a green giant fell out of the stars and taught a broken world that even the deepest occupation could end. May the Force be with you.